You put that there! I saw you!
What? No, I didn't! This isn't my—
Security cameras never lie. And on November 15, 2024, they captured something that would shake an entire airline to its core. A 9-year-old girl, handcuffed, tears streaming down her face, being escorted through Atlanta's Hartsfield-Jackson Airport while hundreds of passengers pulled out their phones to record. Her crime, according to a veteran flight attendant? Smoking in an airplane bathroom and stealing a diamond bracelet from a fellow passenger. But here's what those cameras also captured: the truth. And when that little girl's mother found out what really happened 30,000 feet in the air, she didn't just demand justice. She declared war. This is the story of Sophie Richardson, a 9-year-old with dreams of touching the stars, who instead found herself accused of crimes she didn't commit by a woman whose hatred ran deeper than anyone imagined. Let me take you back to where it all began. That morning, Sophie Richardson sat in seat 23B of Flight 447, her small hands clutching a worn book about the solar system. She was tiny for 9 years old, with her natural hair pulled into 2 perfect puffs that her mother had spent 20 minutes perfecting that morning. Her oversized NASA hoodie practically swallowed her frame, and her glasses, just slightly too big for her small face, kept sliding down her nose as she read. Every few minutes she pushed them back up with one finger, completely absorbed in the chapter about Mars exploration. In her lap sat a backpack covered in constellation stickers, each one placed carefully over the past year, a visual diary of her growing love for space and science. To anyone who looked at her, really looked at her, Sophie was just a nervous kid on her first solo flight. She'd been reading the same page for 10 minutes, too anxious to concentrate but too proud to admit she was scared. This was supposed to be her big girl moment. Her mother, Dr. Amara Richardson, had finally agreed to let her fly alone from New York to Atlanta to visit her grandmother. At 9 years old, Sophie had begged for this independence, pleaded that she was responsible enough, mature enough. And her mother, after weeks of hesitation, had finally said yes. But Sophie wasn't just any 9-year-old, and Dr. Amara Richardson wasn't just any mother. Amara had built an empire from nothing, transforming a tiny tech startup in her garage into Richardson Tech Industries, a company now worth $2.3 billion. She'd done it as a single mother, working 18-hour days while Sophie slept, taking calls during parent-teacher conferences, building her daughter's future while building her company. And everything Amara had built, every dollar she'd earned, every hour she'd sacrificed, it all came from the same place, making sure her daughter would never experience what she had experienced growing up. Amara knew what it was like to be followed in stores. She knew the feeling of being watched, suspected, guilty until proven innocent. She'd been Sophie's age when a security guard accused her of stealing a candy bar she'd been holding money to pay for. She'd been 12 when a teacher assumed she'd cheated on a test because her score was too high. She'd been 17 when a police officer pulled her over for driving while black in the wrong neighborhood, her acceptance letter to MIT sitting on the passenger seat meaning nothing to the man who made her sit on the curb for 40 minutes. Every humiliation, every microaggression, every assumption had fueled her drive to build something her daughter could inherit, a shield of success and wealth that might protect Sophie from the same wounds. That morning, in the departures terminal at JFK, Amara had knelt down to Sophie's height, straightening the collar of that NASA hoodie. Her locks, elegant and professional, had framed a face that commanded boardrooms but softened only for her daughter. She'd held Sophie's face in both hands, looking into eyes that mirrored her own. "Baby girl, remember what I told you. You stay in your seat unless you need the bathroom. You're polite to everyone. You do not leave anything valuable where someone can take it. And you call me the second you land. Not after you get your bag. Not after you see Grandma. The second that plane touches the ground." Sophie had nodded solemnly, trying to project confidence she didn't quite feel. "I remember, Mommy. I'll be careful. I promise. I know you will. You're my smart girl. My brave girl." Amara had kissed her forehead, breathing in the cocoa butter scent of her daughter's hair, fighting the urge to scoop her up and cancel the whole trip. But Sophie needed this. She needed to know she could do hard things. So Amara had watched her daughter walk through security, turning back 3 times to wave, until she disappeared into the crowd of travelers. Now, 3 hours later, Amara sat in a conference room on the 47th floor of her Manhattan headquarters, surrounded by charts and projections for the company's expansion into artificial intelligence. Her assistant, Sarah, a sharp woman in her 30s who'd been with Amara since the early days, was presenting quarterly figures when Amara's personal phone buzzed. She normally silenced it during meetings, but today, with Sophie in the air, she'd left it on. Just in case. The number on the screen made her blood run cold. Atlanta Airport Security. She answered before the second ring. "This is Dr. Richardson." The voice on the other end was professional, detached, rehearsed. "Dr. Richardson, this is Officer Bennett with Atlanta Airport Police. There's been an incident involving your daughter, Sophie Richardson, on Flight 447 from New York." The room tilted. Amara gripped the edge of the table, her knuckles going white. "What kind of incident? Is she hurt?" "Ma'am, your daughter is safe, but she's been detained for questioning regarding some serious allegations. A flight attendant has accused her of smoking in the aircraft lavatory and stealing from another passenger. We're going to need you to—" Amara didn't hear the rest. The phone slipped from her hand, clattering on the polished conference table. Around her, executives froze, uncertain whether to speak or stay silent. But Amara wasn't seeing them anymore. She was seeing Sophie at age 3, proudly showing her a crayon drawing of the moon. Sophie at 5, asking why the sky was blue and not satisfied with simple answers. Sophie at 7, winning her first science fair with a project on solar energy. Sophie this morning trying so hard to be brave. And now her baby was detained. Alone. Sarah moved first, picking up the phone, speaking in calm tones to the officer while Amara's world splintered into 1,000 sharp pieces. Then something clicked inside her, that same mechanism that had allowed her to negotiate with venture capitalists when she had nothing, to stand in front of hostile board members and make them listen, to build an empire when everyone said she'd fail. The fear crystallized into fury, cold and precise and absolutely lethal. She stood up so fast her chair rolled backward and hit the wall. "Clear my schedule. Everything. I don't care what it is, cancel it. Sarah, give me Thomas Chin on the phone right now. Tell him to meet me at Teterboro in 30 minutes with everything we have on airline liability law. Get my jet fueled and ready for immediate departure to Atlanta. And I want our investigative team pulling every single piece of information they can find about Flight 447, its crew, and specifically whoever accused my daughter. Names, employment histories, social media, everything. I want to know what toothpaste they use. I want it all before we land." The room exploded into motion. Assistants grabbed phones. Junior executives scattered to execute orders. Sarah was already dialing, her own face tight with anger. She'd watched Sophie grow up, had babysat her through countless late nights when Amara couldn't leave the office. This wasn't just business. This was personal for all of them. Amara grabbed her coat and bag, already moving toward the door. "And someone find out which airline this was. I want their CEO's private number, their general counsel, everyone in their chain of command. If they don't answer, I want their home addresses. I want leverage. All of it." One of the junior executives, knew enough to not know better, spoke up hesitantly. "Dr. Richardson, maybe we should wait to hear the full story before." Amara turned on him with a look that could freeze magma. "My daughter is 9 years old. She's never even been near a cigarette. She's terrified of breaking rules. Last month she cried because she forgot to return a library book on time. And you think I should wait?" Her voice could have cut glass. "When someone accuses your child of being a criminal, you don't wait. You act. And you make sure it never, ever happens again." She was out the door before anyone could respond, her heels clicking a rapid rhythm on the marble floors as she headed for the elevator. Behind her, Sarah barked orders into 2 phones at once while pulling up flight information on her tablet. The machine was in motion now, and God help anyone who stood in its way. But let me take you back to the plane, to the moment when everything started to unravel for Sophie. Because while her mother was just finding out something was wrong, Sophie had already been living her nightmare for over an hour. It had started innocently enough. Sophie had been reading for about 30 minutes when her mouth got dry. She'd finished the apple juice her mother had bought her at the airport, and now she needed something else to drink. She remembered her mother's instructions. Be polite, use your manners, don't be demanding. So when the flight attendant came by, Sophie had raised her hand politely, waiting to be acknowledged like she did in school. The flight attendant who stopped at her row was named Vanessa Clarke, though Sophie wouldn't learn her name until much later. Vanessa was 42 years old, with 15 years of experience with the airline. She wore her uniform with precision, every button aligned, every hair sprayed into place. Her makeup was perfect, her smile practiced. But that smile never quite reached her eyes, especially not when those eyes landed on Sophie. Yes. Vanessa's tone wasn't warm, but Sophie, nervous and trying to be good, didn't notice the edge in it. "Excuse me, ma'am. Could I please have some apple juice?" "That's okay. Please." Vanessa looked at Sophie for a long moment, her gaze traveling from the constellation stickers on Sophie's backpack to the NASA hoodie to the book about Mars in her lap. Something flickered across her face, too quick for Sophie to identify. Disapproval? Annoyance? Something darker? Apple juice, Vanessa repeated, as if Sophie had asked for champagne. Fine. Wait here. Sophie nodded eagerly. Thank you so much, ma'am. But Vanessa had already turned away, disappearing into the galley. Sophie went back to her book, excited that she'd successfully completed her first in-flight transaction. See, Mommy? I can do this. I'm responsible. 5 minutes passed. Then 10. Sophie kept glancing up, wondering if Vanessa had forgotten, but she didn't want to be rude by asking again. Her mother had told her that flight attendants were busy and to be patient. So she waited, reading the same paragraph about Mars's atmosphere over and over without absorbing a word. Finally, 15 minutes after she'd asked, Vanessa returned with a small plastic cup of apple juice. She didn't hand it to Sophie gently. Instead, she placed it on the tray table with more force than necessary, hard enough that some of the juice sloshed over the rim and onto Sophie's book. There, Vanessa said, her voice flat. Sophie looked at the wet pages of her book, her favorite book that she'd read a dozen times, now stained with apple juice. But she remembered her manners. Thank you, ma'am, she said quietly, trying to dab at the pages with her napkin. Vanessa stood there for a moment longer, looking down at Sophie with an expression the little girl couldn't quite read. Then she walked away without another word, leaving Sophie to salvage her book and drink her juice, completely unaware that she'd just had her first encounter with someone who had already decided what kind of person she was based solely on the color of her skin. The flight continued. Sophie eventually gave up on the damaged pages and pulled out her homework instead. Her teacher had assigned a creative writing project, what I did over Thanksgiving break. Sophie was going to write about visiting her grandmother, about the sweet potato pie Grandma Joyce made that was the best in the world, about the stories her grandmother told about their family history. Sophie had been looking forward to this visit for months. 45 minutes into the flight, Sophie finally needed to use the bathroom. She'd been holding it, not wanting to bother anyone, but eventually nature won. She unbuckled her seatbelt carefully, checking to make sure the seatbelt sign was off like her mother had taught her. The aisle was clear. She made her way to the bathroom at the back of the plane, her backpack still at her seat. The bathroom was tiny and intimidating with all its buttons and weird blue lighting, but Sophie managed. She washed her hands thoroughly, using soap twice because that's what her mother always insisted on. Clean hands, healthy body. She was just about to open the door when she heard Vanessa's voice outside, talking to another flight attendant. I'm telling you, Jamie, something's off about that kid in 23B. Sophie froze, her hand on the door handle. A younger voice responded, confused. The little girl with the NASA hoodie? She seems sweet. What's wrong? Just watch. Kids like that, they always cause problems. Parents probably spoil her rotten, think the rules don't apply to them. Vanessa, she's just a kid flying alone. She's probably nervous. We'll see. Sophie heard them walk away, their voices fading. She stood in the bathroom for another minute, her heart pounding in a way she didn't understand. Kids like that. What did that mean? What kind of kid was she? She was just Sophie. Sophie, who loved science and hated mushrooms and wanted to be an astronaut and sometimes forgot to make her bed but always said please and thank you. She opened the door and hurried back to her seat, suddenly feeling like everyone was watching her even though most passengers were asleep or watching movies. She slid back into 23B, buckling her seatbelt with shaking fingers, and tried to go back to her homework. But the words blurred on the page. 20 minutes later, everything fell apart. Vanessa Clarke walked down the aisle, and when she reached Sophie's row, she stopped. She sniffed the air dramatically, her nostrils flaring like she'd smelled something disgusting. Then she looked directly at Sophie. Young lady, Vanessa said loudly, loud enough that passengers in nearby rows looked up from their books and screens. Have you been smoking in the bathroom? Sophie's eyes went wide with shock and confusion. What? No, ma'am. I don't smoke. I'm 9. I can smell cigarette smoke all over you, Vanessa insisted, her voice rising. Don't lie to me. Now more passengers were paying attention. Phones started to come out, a modern reflex. Document everything. You never know what you might see. I promise I didn't smoke, Sophie said, her voice getting smaller, tears starting to build behind her glasses. I've never smoked anything. My mom would be so upset if I even thought about it. Please, ma'am, I didn't do anything wrong. In the row behind Sophie, an elderly white woman named Margaret Patterson leaned forward, drawn into the drama. I do smell something, she said, not unkindly but not helpfully either. It's a bit smoky. Vanessa seized on this. See? Other passengers can smell it too. Ma'am, did you smoke in our lavatory? No. Sophie was crying now, tears running down her cheeks and fogging up her glasses. Please, I promise. Can you call my mom? She'll tell you. Please. I'm going to need to check your bag, Vanessa announced, reaching for Sophie's backpack without waiting for permission. Okay, Sophie said, desperate to prove her innocence. You can look. There's nothing bad in there. Just my books and stuff. Vanessa pulled the backpack from under the seat and, instead of discreetly checking it, dumped its entire contents into the aisle. Books tumbled out. Pencils scattered. A worn stuffed elephant named Mr. Whiskers that Sophie had owned since she was 3 landed on its side. Homework papers fluttered. And a small leather purse, delicate and old, fell out last. Sophie gasped. Please be careful with that. My grandmother gave it to me. It was her mother's. Vanessa picked up the purse, examining it with exaggerated suspicion. She opened it slowly, and Sophie knew exactly what was inside, the diamond bracelet. Her mother had given it to her just last month with explicit instructions to keep it safe. It had belonged to Amara's mother, Sophie's grandmother, who had passed away when Sophie was just a baby. Amara had worn it through college, through building her company, through every important moment in her life. And now she was passing it to Sophie, who was bringing it to Grandma Joyce in Atlanta. It was a family heirloom, a piece of their history, irreplaceable and precious. Vanessa pulled out the bracelet, holding it up to the light. The diamonds caught the overhead lights, sparkling expensively. And what is this? She asked, her tone dripping with false sweetness. This looks very expensive for a little girl to be carrying around. My mom gave me that, Sophie said urgently, reaching for it, but Vanessa pulled it away. It was my grandmother's. I'm bringing it to my other grandma in Atlanta. Please, that's really important. You can call my mom, she'll tell you everything. Vanessa turned to Mrs. Patterson. Ma'am, didn't I see you wearing a bracelet earlier? Could this be yours? Mrs. Patterson, caught up in the moment, flustered by the attention, leaned forward to look. Well, I was wearing a bracelet earlier. I can't quite remember if I took it off or... it does look familiar. And just like that, with one uncertain statement from a confused elderly woman, Sophie's nightmare doubled. We have a thief on board, Vanessa announced to the surrounding passengers, her voice carrying through the cabin. This little girl has been smoking in the lavatory and stealing from passengers. No. Sophie was sobbing now, her whole body shaking. Please, I didn't steal anything. That's mine. My mom will tell you. Please just call her. Please. The younger flight attendant, Jamie, who'd been watching with growing discomfort, stepped forward. Vanessa, maybe we should just wait until we land and let security handle? I'm the senior attendant here, Vanessa cut her off sharply. And I'm handling this situation. This is a serious matter. Smoking on an aircraft is a federal offense. Theft is a crime. I'm notifying the captain immediately. Sophie was hyperventilating now, her breath coming in short gasps, her vision swimming behind tears and fogged glasses. Around her, passengers had different reactions. Some looked sympathetic, clearly uncomfortable with what they were seeing. Others looked judgmental, already convinced of her guilt because why would a flight attendant lie? A young black man 3 rows up, named Marcus, held up his phone, recording the whole interaction. His face was tight with recognition and anger. He'd been there, falsely accused, humiliated in public. He knew exactly what was happening. Ma'am, Marcus said, his voice calm but firm. Maybe we should all just take a breath here. The kid says she didn't do it. Maybe we don't need to make this such a big scene. Vanessa turned on him with surprising venom. Sir, I need you to stay out of this unless you want to be removed from this flight as well. Return to your seat immediately. Marcus held her gaze for a long moment, then looked at Sophie, trying to communicate something with his eyes. I see you. I believe you. But he sat back down, knowing that if he pushed further, he'd be labeled as disruptive, and that wouldn't help Sophie at all. But he kept recording, making sure every word, every moment, was captured. Vanessa pulled out her phone, calling the cockpit. Captain Morrison? We have a situation back here. A minor passenger smoking in the lavatory and theft of jewelry from another passenger. Yes, sir. We're going to need police to meet us at the gate. Yes, I'm absolutely certain. Multiple witnesses. Yes, sir. Sophie felt like she was drowning. The cabin suddenly felt too small, too hot, the walls closing in. She couldn't breathe. She couldn't think. She just kept saying the same thing over and over. Please call my mom. Please call my mom. Please call my mom. But nobody called her mom. Instead, Vanessa confiscated Sophie's phone, for evidence, she said. Sophie was moved to the very back row of the plane, away from other passengers, with Vanessa standing guard as if Sophie might try to escape at 30,000 feet. The stolen bracelet and the cigarettes that Sophie had never seen before in her life were sealed in plastic bags. Evidence. Proof of crime she didn't commit. Mrs. Patterson, in her original seat, was starting to feel uncertain. The more she thought about it, the less sure she was about that bracelet. Had she been wearing one? She couldn't quite remember. And the little girl had seemed so genuinely confused and scared. That didn't seem like the reaction of a thief caught red-handed. That seemed like the reaction of someone telling the truth. But Vanessa had been so certain, so authoritative. Flight attendants knew what they were doing, right? They were trained for these situations. Mrs. Patterson pushed down her doubts and tried to go back to her crossword puzzle, but the words wouldn't come into focus. In the back of the plane, Sophie sat with her arms wrapped around herself, shaking. Jamie, the younger flight attendant, brought her a cup of water, setting it down gently on the tray table. She leaned in close and whispered, "Sweetie, just hang in there, okay? We'll get this sorted out when we land." Vanessa, watching from a few feet away, snapped, "Jamie, step away from her. We don't coddle criminals. She could be dangerous." "She's 9 years old," Jamie said, a note of defiance creeping into her voice. "She's terrified. She should be terrified. Actions have consequences. Now get back to your station." Jamie looked at Sophie one more time, her eyes apologetic, and walked away. Sophie was alone again, trapped in a nightmare with no way out and no way to reach her mother. She thought about Amara, probably in a meeting right now, probably thinking Sophie was safely reading her book and sipping apple juice. Sophie wanted her mother so badly it physically hurt, a pain in her chest that made it hard to breathe. She thought about the science fair project she'd been planning for next month, about the telescope her mother had promised they'd buy together, about the NASA summer camp application she'd been filling out. She thought about how her teacher, Ms. Rivera, always said Sophie was going to do great things, was going to change the world with her brilliant mind. But right now, Sophie didn't feel brilliant. She felt small and scared and powerless. What Sophie didn't know was that Marcus's video was already being uploaded to social media. He'd captioned it simply, "9-year-old black girl accused of smoking and theft on Flight 447. Watch how they treat her." This is 2024. Within minutes, it had been shared 100 times. Within an hour, thousands. The hashtag justice for Sophie was starting to trend, though Sophie didn't know it yet. And 700 miles away, her mother was boarding a private jet with a lawyer in tow, her phone pressed to her ear, making call after call, assembling an army. Because Dr. Amara Richardson had built an empire, and she was about to use every ounce of that power to protect her child. On the private jet, cruising at 41,000 feet toward Atlanta, Amara Richardson was a force of controlled fury. Across from her sat Thomas Chin, her personal attorney and one of the sharpest legal minds on the East Coast. He'd been Amara's lawyer since the early days of her company, had helped her navigate hostile acquisitions, patent disputes, and regulatory nightmares. But this was different. This was personal in a way that made his own hands shake as he reviewed documents on his tablet. "Talk to me," Amara said, her voice steady despite the storm raging inside her. "What do we know?" Thomas looked up from his screen. "Flight 447, New York to Atlanta. The flight attendant who made the accusations is Vanessa Clarke, 42, 15 years with the airline. She's senior crew on that route." He paused, his jaw tightening. "Amara, she has 3 complaints in her file. All dismissed by management. All involving passengers of color." Amara's eyes closed for just a moment. Of course this wasn't the first time. "Tell me about the complaints." 2 years ago, a black teenage boy. She accused him of being disruptive and trying to open an emergency exit. Multiple passengers contradicted her story, said the kid was asleep most of the flight. The airline settled quietly, sealed the records. Last year, a Latina woman flying with her infant. Clarke claimed the woman was intoxicated and neglecting the child. Turned out the woman was a pediatric nurse and stone-cold sober. Security footage proved it. Another quiet settlement. And 6 months ago, an Asian businessman. She accused him of sexually harassing her. His company's legal team tore her story apart, found inconsistencies, proved he'd been on a work call in his seat the entire time she claimed he was bothering her. "So the airline knew," Amara said, "and it wasn't a question. They knew she was targeting people and they kept her flying. Not just kept her flying. They promoted her to senior attendant 3 months ago. Despite these complaints. Despite the pattern." Amara's hands clenched into fists. "They're liable. The airline, the supervisors who ignored the complaints, everyone in that chain of command. We're going to dismantle them piece by piece. Sarah, sitting nearby with 3 phones and 2 tablets, looked up. The airline is TransContinental Airways. Their CEO is Richard Hastings. I've been trying to reach him for the last 40 minutes. His office says he's unavailable. Make him available, Amara said coldly. Find out where he lives, where his kids go to school, where he plays golf. I don't care if we have to show up at his house at midnight. He will talk to me today. Thomas pulled up more information. I've got our investigative team pulling everything on Vanessa Clarke. Social media, financial records, everything that's public. So far what they're finding is concerning. She's active in several online groups that are, to put it mildly, problematic. Anti-immigration rhetoric, complaints about diversity hiring, shared articles about crime statistics with racial undertones. So she's a racist, Amara said bluntly. And the airline put her in a position of authority over passengers. Over children. She looked out the window at the clouds below, thinking about Sophie alone and scared in some security office. How long until we land? 23 minutes, the pilot's voice came through the intercom. 23 minutes. Sophie had been in custody for over an hour now. Every minute felt like a year, every second that her daughter was being treated like a criminal was a second Amara would make someone pay for. She pulled out her phone and dialed again, this time reaching one of her board members who happened to be a former federal prosecutor. David, it's Amara. I need you to tell me everything about false arrest law, particularly involving minors. And I need to know it in the next 20 minutes. While David talked, explaining the legal framework, the precedents, the potential charges that could be filed, Amara's mind was already 3 steps ahead. This wasn't just about Sophie anymore, though Sophie was everything. This was about every other child who'd been falsely accused, every other black or brown person who'd been presumed guilty, every other instance where the system had failed and no one with power had cared enough to burn it all down. Sarah interrupted, excitement in her voice. Amara, you need to see this. Marcus Johnson, the passenger who recorded the incident, his video has over 2 million views now. It's everywhere. CNN is covering it. MSNBC. Fox News. The hashtag Justice for Sophie is #1 trending in the United States. Amara grabbed one of Sarah's tablets and watched the video. There was her baby, her brilliant, kind, scared little girl, being accused, being humiliated, crying and begging for someone to call her mother. Amara watched Vanessa Clarke's face, saw the satisfaction there, the certainty, the absolute conviction that she had the right to treat Sophie this way. And she watched the other passengers, some uncomfortable but silent, some recording but not intervening, a plane full of adults who let a child be destroyed because intervening would have been inconvenient. The video ended with Sophie being moved to the back of the plane, handcuffed in her mind if not yet in reality, her small frame shaking with sobs. Amara set down the tablet carefully because if she didn't, she might throw it across the cabin. Good, she said finally, her voice like ice. Let the world watch. Let everyone see exactly what happened to my daughter. Because when we're done, this airline won't have anywhere to hide. Thomas was reviewing more documents. The cigarettes they found, they ran preliminary fingerprints. I've got a source in Atlanta PD who owes me a favor. Amara, only 1 set of prints on those cigarettes. Not Sophie's. The implications hung in the air. Someone had planted evidence on a 9-year-old child. Someone had committed a federal crime to frame an innocent little girl. And Amara was going to find out exactly who and make sure they paid for it in every way possible. The plane began its descent into Atlanta. Below them, the city sprawled, and somewhere in that city was Sophie, waiting for her mother, probably thinking she'd done something wrong, probably wondering why no one believed her. Amara closed her eyes and made a silent promise to her daughter. I'm coming, baby girl. And I'm bringing hell with me. Meanwhile, in the sterile security office at Atlanta's airport, Sophie sat in a hard plastic chair, her feet not quite reaching the floor. Officer Rodriguez sat across from her, his voice gentle, trying to get her story. Behind the one-way mirror, Officer Bennett and Lieutenant Morrison watched, along with an airline representative named Mr. Davidson who looked increasingly uncomfortable as Sophie spoke. So you're saying you never saw these cigarettes before today? Rodriguez asked, holding up the evidence bag. Sophie shook her head, her eyes red from crying. No, sir. I don't know where they came from. They just appeared in my bag. I didn't put them there. I promise. Rodriguez examined the cigarettes again. They were Marlboro Reds, a harsh adult brand. He'd been a cop for 20 years, had 3 kids of his own, and something about this whole situation felt wrong. Sophie, I want to believe you, okay? But I need you to help me understand. These cigarettes have to have come from somewhere. The flight attendant, Sophie said quietly. When she dumped out my bag. Maybe she put them there? I don't know. All I know is they're not mine. In the observation room, Mr. Davidson shifted uncomfortably. We should call her parents before we go any further with this interrogation. We've notified the mother, Bennett said. She's on her way. And in the meantime, we're questioning a 9-year-old without a guardian present? Davidson's voice rose slightly. Do you understand the liability here? If this goes sideways. It won't go sideways, Lieutenant Morrison said firmly. We have a flight attendant with 15 years of experience making credible accusations. We have cigarettes found in the child's possession. We have a witness who says the bracelet might be hers. This is by the book. The witness now says she's not sure, Davidson pointed out. Mrs. Patterson is out there saying she made a mistake. Morrison waved this away. People get uncertain when they're questioned. It happens. The initial statement is what matters. But Rodriguez in the interview room was having his own doubts. He pulled out his phone and done a quick search on Sophie's mother. Dr. Amara Richardson, billionaire tech CEO, philanthropist, one of the most powerful black women in America. And this little girl with her NASA hoodie and her stuffed elephant was her daughter. A daughter who, according to everything Rodriguez could find online, was an honor student, a science fair winner, a kid who volunteered at animal shelters and read to kindergartners at the library. Sophie, Rodriguez said gently, I'm going to level with you. This situation is serious. But I want you to know that I'm listening to you, okay? I hear what you're saying. Sophie looked up at him with desperate hope. You believe me? I'm trying to figure out the truth. And the truth is some things aren't adding up. These cigarettes, they're adult cigarettes. The really strong kind. If you were going to experiment with smoking, you probably wouldn't choose these. Kids usually go for something lighter. I wouldn't choose any, Sophie insisted. I hate smoking. My real grandma who died, she died from lung cancer from smoking. My mom told me all about it. I would never ever smoke. Ever. Rodriguez nodded slowly. What about the bracelet? Tell me about that. Sophie's eyes filled with tears again, but she spoke clearly. My mom gave it to me last month. It was her mom's, my grandma who I never got to meet because she died when I was a baby. My mom said it was important, that it was part of our family history. She wore it when she graduated from MIT. She wore it when she started her company. She wore it when she got her first big contract. And now she gave it to me to take to Grandma Joyce in Atlanta because she wanted both of us to have it for Thanksgiving. It's the most important thing I own. I would never let anyone take it. And I definitely didn't steal it from anyone. The raw honesty in her voice, the specific details, the way she talked about the bracelet's history, all of it rang true. Rodriguez had interviewed hundreds of people, and he knew the difference between a rehearsed story and the truth. Sophie was telling the truth. He was sure of it. He stood up. Sophie, I'm going to step outside for just a minute, okay? I'll be right back. You're not in trouble. We're just talking. He left the room and immediately confronted his lieutenant. This is wrong. The kid's telling the truth. Morrison's face hardened. Based on what? Your gut feeling? Based on 20 years of interviewing people. Based on the evidence not making sense. Based on those fingerprints that aren't matching. Lieutenant, we're about to destroy a 9-year-old's life because a flight attendant had a bad day. Or because the flight attendant caught a kid breaking federal law, Morrison shot back. I'm not throwing away a case because you feel sorry for her. It's not about feeling sorry. It's about the evidence. Or lack of it. Davidson, the airline representative, spoke up. Perhaps we should wait for the mother to arrive before we proceed further. Dr. Richardson is, from what I understand, quite influential. If we mishandle this. We're not mishandling anything, Morrison insisted. But her voice had a note of uncertainty now. Because she'd also looked up Amara Richardson, and she knew exactly how badly this could go if they were wrong. Back in the interview room, Sophie sat alone, hugging herself, trying to be brave. She thought about what her mother always told her. Baby girl, the truth always comes out. It might take time, but it always comes out. So you hold on to your truth, and you don't let anyone make you doubt it. Sophie held on to her truth. She hadn't smoked. She hadn't stolen. She was innocent. And her mother was coming. Her mother always came. Outside the airport, in the terminal, Marcus Johnson was still posting updates to social media. His phone hadn't stopped buzzing with notifications, messages of support, interview requests from news organizations. He'd captured something that people needed to see, evidence of injustice happening in real time. And now, standing in the baggage claim area, he saw something that made him start recording again. Dr. Amara Richardson had arrived. She moved through the airport like a storm system, with purpose and power that made people instinctively step aside. She wore a tailored suit, her locks pulled back, her face a mask of controlled fury. Behind her, Thomas Chin moved with equal determination, his briefcase in hand, his phone to his ear coordinating their legal strategy. And behind him, Sarah, still managing logistics, still making calls, still assembling the army. Amara didn't slow down for anyone. When airport security tried to stop her at the checkpoint to the secure areas, she simply said, "My daughter. Sophie Richardson. Where is she?" The security guard, young and overwhelmed, stammered, "Ma'am, I can't just let you." Thomas stepped forward, producing documents. Dr. Richardson's minor daughter is being detained without parental notification. You have approximately 30 seconds to tell us where she is before this becomes a federal lawsuit for violating parental rights. The guard made a quick call, and suddenly they had an escort, a senior security official who led them quickly through corridors and service hallways toward the security offices. Amara didn't speak during the walk. She was beyond words. She was pure determination, pure maternal protection, pure fury. They reached the security office complex, and immediately Amara could hear raised voices behind a closed door. Lieutenant Morrison arguing with Officer Rodriguez. Mr. Davidson trying to mediate. All of them arguing about what to do with Sophie while Sophie sat alone in another room, waiting. Amara didn't knock. She pushed open the door and every person in that room turned to look at her. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 20 degrees. "Where," Amara said, her voice deadly quiet, "is my daughter?" Lieutenant Morrison recovered first. "Dr. Richardson, I'm Lieutenant Morrison. Your daughter is safe. She's in an interview room just down the hall. We've been waiting for you to arrive before we... You've been questioning my 9-year-old daughter without a parent or attorney present? We were simply trying to establish the facts." "The facts." Amara's voice rose, all that control slipping for just a moment. "The fact is you handcuffed the child. The fact is you paraded her through this airport like a criminal while hundreds of people recorded it. The fact is you accused my daughter, who has never had so much as a detention in school, of federal crimes based on the word of a flight attendant who has multiple complaints in her file. Those are the facts, Lieutenant. Now take me to Sophie. Right now." The room was silent. Then Rodriguez spoke up. "Ma'am, I'll take you to her." He led Amara down a short hallway to another room. Through a small window in the door, Amara could see Sophie sitting in that plastic chair, looking so small, so scared, her arms wrapped around herself. The sight of her daughter like this, in this place, accused and alone, nearly broke Amara's composure entirely. But she held it together because Sophie needed her to be strong. Rodriguez opened the door. "Sophie, your mom's here." Sophie's head snapped up, and when she saw Amara, something in her face just crumbled. All the bravery she'd been trying to hold on to, all the strength she'd been forcing herself to show, it all dissolved. "Mommy," she sobbed and ran across the room. Amara caught her daughter, wrapping her arms around her, holding her tight. Sophie was crying so hard she was shaking, and Amara just held her, one hand on the back of Sophie's head, the other around her back, protecting her, shielding her, being the barrier between Sophie and this nightmare. "I've got you, baby. I've got you. Mommy's here. You're safe now. I've got you." "I didn't do it," Sophie sobbed into her mother's shoulder. "I promise I didn't do anything. I tried to tell them but they wouldn't listen. They wouldn't call you. I asked and they wouldn't call you. I know, baby. I know you didn't do anything. I know." Amara looked up at Rodriguez, and in her eyes was a promise of retribution that made him take an involuntary step back. "We're leaving. Now." Thomas appeared in the doorway. "Dr. Richardson, we need to address the charges before." "There are no charges," Amara said flatly, still holding Sophie, "because there was no crime. My daughter is innocent. And we are leaving this building right now." Lieutenant Morrison pushed past Rodriguez. "Ma'am, we still have an active investigation." "Then investigate," Amara said, standing up with Sophie still clinging to her. "But you'll do it without my daughter. Sophie, don't say another word to anyone. Do you understand? Not a single word." Sophie nodded against her mother's shoulder. Thomas pulled out a card, handing it to Morrison. "Any further communication goes through me. Any attempts to contact Sophie directly will be considered harassment of a minor. We'll be filing formal complaints against this department, against the airline, and against everyone involved in this travesty. Expect to hear from us." Amara carried Sophie toward the door, and the officers had to make a choice: physically stop her or let her go. They let her go. Because stopping her would have been assault, would have been one more charge in the lawsuit that was definitely coming, and because frankly the look in Amara Richardson's eyes made it clear that physically stopping her would require force they weren't prepared to use. They walked out of that security office, through the corridors, back into the main terminal. And waiting there was Marcus, still recording, along with dozens of other passengers who'd seen the video, who'd come to bear witness, who wanted to show support. When they saw Amara carrying Sophie, a spontaneous applause broke out. People cheered. Some cried. An elderly black woman approached, gently touching Amara's arm. "You get them, baby," she said quietly. "You make them pay for what they did to your child." Amara nodded, tears finally threatening to break through her composure, and kept walking. Sarah had a car waiting outside, a black SUV with tinted windows. They climbed in, and only when the doors were closed, when they were finally truly alone, did Amara let herself cry. She held Sophie in her lap, this beautiful brilliant baby who'd been treated like a criminal, and she cried for the fear her daughter had felt, for the injustice of it all, for every black child who'd been through this and whose parents hadn't had the resources to fight back. "Mommy," Sophie whispered, "are you mad at me?" Amara pulled back, looking at her daughter in shock. "Mad at you? Baby, no. I could never be mad at you. You didn't do anything wrong. None of this was your fault. Do you understand me? None of it." But the lady said. "That lady was wrong. That lady was cruel and racist and wrong. And we are going to make sure she can never do this to another child. But you, my sweet girl, you did nothing wrong. You were polite. You were brave. You told the truth. You did everything right." Sophie buried her face in her mother's neck again. "I was so scared. I wanted you so bad. I know, baby. I'm so sorry I wasn't there. I'm so sorry." Amara looked up at Thomas in the front seat. "Tell me we can destroy them. Tell me we can make this right." Thomas turned around, his face grim but determined. "Amara, by the time we're done, that airline is going to wish they'd never heard the name Sophie Richardson. The evidence is clear. The fingerprints don't match. The witness has recanted. That flight attendant has a documented history of targeting minority passengers that management ignored. We have them on negligent hiring, on violating federal anti-discrimination laws, on false arrest, on emotional distress, on a dozen different counts. And with that video going viral with the whole country watching, they can't make this go away quietly." "I don't want them to make it go away quietly," Amara said, her voice steel. "I want it loud. I want everyone to see. I want other parents to know what happened so they can protect their children. I want that flight attendant in prison. I want everyone who enabled her fired. I want the entire system that allowed this to happen torn down and rebuilt. And I want Sophie to know that when someone wrongs you, when someone tries to break you, you fight back with everything you have." Sarah leaned back from the passenger seat. "The airline stock is already dropping. Down 12% in after-hours trading. Their PR department is in full meltdown. And the CEO? Richard Hastings? He's agreed to meet with you tomorrow morning." "Not tomorrow," Amara said. "Tonight. Right now. Because every hour they don't fix this is another hour my daughter's face is on the news as an accused criminal. We're not waiting. We're going to war. Tonight." The SUV pulled up to the Ritz-Carlton, where Amara kept a suite for business trips to Atlanta. Grandmother Joyce was already there, waiting, and when she saw Sophie, she swept her up in a hug that smelled like cocoa butter and safety. "My grandbaby," Joyce whispered, rocking Sophie gently. "My sweet baby girl. Come here, let Grandma take care of you." Joyce took Sophie to the bedroom to clean her up, to feed her, to provide the immediate comfort that grandmothers specialize in. And in the living room of the suite, Amara Richardson assembled her war council. Thomas spread documents across the coffee table. Sarah had 3 laptops running, pulling data, organizing information, coordinating with their investigative team back in New York. And Amara stood at the window, looking out over Atlanta, planning her attack. "The fingerprints on the cigarettes," Thomas said, "belong solely to Vanessa Clarke. Not a single print from Sophie. Not even a partial. That means Clarke handled every surface of that cigarette pack, and Sophie never touched it. So she planted it," Amara said. "It wasn't a question. That's the only logical explanation. Which means we're talking about evidence tampering, filing a false police report, and depending on how we argue it, potentially kidnapping. She held Sophie against her will under false pretenses." Sarah looked up from her laptop. "I've got Clarke's social media. And Amara, you need to see this." She turned the screen around. Amara walked over and read through posts from Vanessa Clarke's Facebook, posts that hadn't been private, posts that showed a pattern of racist rhetoric, complaints about demographic changes, coded language about those people, and certain types, shares of articles from questionable sources about crime statistics and immigration. It was all there, a digital trail of bias that TransContinental Airways should have seen if they'd been paying attention. They knew, Amara said quietly. Or they should have known. This is all public. A basic background check, a simple social media review, would have revealed who this woman is. But they promoted her anyway. There's more, Sarah said. I found the previous complaints, the sealed settlements. The airline paid out a total of $1.2 million over the past 3 years to settle discrimination complaints. 3 different cases, 3 different passengers, all people of color, all involving Vanessa Clarke. And they kept her flying. They kept putting her in positions of authority over passengers. Thomas was already making notes. That's negligent retention. That's creating a dangerous situation. That's knowingly allowing a problem employee to continue problematic behavior. Amara, this is bigger than just Sophie's case. This is a pattern of institutional failure. Good, Amara said. Because I want the institution to answer for it. I want everyone who signed off on keeping Clarke employed to answer for it. I want the HR department, the legal department, everyone who saw these complaints and did nothing, I want them all to face consequences. Her phone buzzed. It was Richard Hastings, CEO of TransContinental Airways, finally calling her back. Amara answered on speaker. Dr. Richardson, Hastings began, his voice trying for sympathetic but landing on nervous. I cannot tell you how sorry I am about what happened to your daughter today. This is absolutely not representative of TransContinental's values or... Save it, Amara cut him off. I don't want your apologies. I want your presence. You have 1 hour to get to the Ritz-Carlton downtown with your general counsel, your head of HR, and anyone else who's going to be making decisions about this situation. 1 hour. If you're not here, my next call is to CNN, and I will give them an interview that will make today's stock drop look like a minor inconvenience. Dr. Richardson, perhaps we could schedule something for tomorrow, give everyone time to gather the facts. The facts are that your employee racially profiled my 9-year-old daughter, planted evidence on her, had her arrested, and humiliated her in front of hundreds of people. Those are the facts. And they're not going to change overnight. 1 hour, Mr. Hastings. The clock is ticking. She hung up. Thomas was smiling despite the situation. That was beautifully done. I'm just getting started, Amara said. In the bedroom, Grandmother Joyce had drawn a bath for Sophie, helped her wash away the day, and now sat with her on the bed, braiding her hair the way she used to braid Amara's hair when Amara was a little girl. Sophie was calmer now, the tears finally stopping, exhaustion setting in. Grandma, Sophie said quietly, do you think I'm going to jail? Joyce's hands paused in Sophie's hair. Baby girl, no. Absolutely not. You didn't do anything wrong, and your mama is out there right now making sure everyone knows it. But what if they don't believe me? What if everyone thinks I'm bad now? Joyce gently turned Sophie around to face her, looking into eyes that held too much fear for someone so young. Listen to me, Sophie. What happened today was not about you. It was about that woman's hate. It was about a system that's been broken for a long time. But you know what? Your mama, she's going to fix that system. She's going to make sure this never happens to another little girl. And you're going to be okay. Because you come from a long line of strong women who don't break. I feel broken, Sophie whispered. You feel hurt. And that's okay. What happened today hurt you, and you're allowed to feel that hurt. But hurt and broken aren't the same thing. You're bruised, baby, but you're not broken. And we're going to help you heal. Your mama, me, everyone who loves you, we're all here to help you heal. Sophie nodded slowly, wanting to believe it. And you know what else? Joyce continued. Tomorrow we're going to make my famous sweet potato pie together just like we planned. Because that woman doesn't get to steal our Thanksgiving. She doesn't get to steal our joy. We take our joy back. You understand? Yes, ma'am. Good girl. Now let's finish these braids, and then you're going to get in these nice soft pajamas, and you're going to sleep in Grandma's bed tonight right next to me where you're safe and loved. Okay. Okay, Grandma. Out in the living room, exactly 53 minutes after Amara's phone call, there was a knock on the suite door. Sarah checked the peephole and nodded to Amara. TransContinental's leadership had arrived. Richard Hastings came in first, a tall man in his 60s who'd clearly been pulled away from something, his tie loosened, his face drawn. Behind him came Patricia Morrison, the general counsel, a black woman in her 40s whose expression suggested she'd been against this entire situation from the start. And finally, David Chin, head of HR, looking like he wanted to be anywhere but here. They sat in the living room of the suite, Hastings on one couch, his team flanking him. Amara sat across from them, Thomas beside her, Sarah standing nearby with her laptop, ready to pull up any information they needed. The power dynamic was clear. Hastings might run an airline, but this was Amara's domain now, and he was on her territory. Dr. Richardson, Hastings began again, I want to assure you. Stop, Amara said, holding up a hand. I'm going to talk now and you're going to listen. Because what I'm about to tell you is going to save your company millions of dollars and possibly your job. Are you listening? Hastings nodded, all pretense of controlling the conversation abandoned. Good. Here's what's going to happen. First, Vanessa Clarke is fired. Not suspended. Not under review. Fired. Effective immediately. And you're going to make a public statement explaining exactly why she was fired. Racial profiling, evidence tampering, and a pattern of discriminatory behavior that your company negligently ignored. Second, every executive who signed off on keeping her employed despite previous complaints is going to face consequences. I don't care if it's termination or demotion, but there will be accountability. Third, you're going to implement mandatory bias training for every single employee, and not the useless kind that checks a box. Real training. Ongoing. With consequences for failure. Fourth, you're going to create an independent oversight committee to review discrimination complaints, because clearly your internal process is worthless. And fifth, you're going to make a substantial donation to organizations that fight racial profiling and support children who've experienced false accusations. I'm thinking $10 million minimum. Hastings looked like he'd been hit by a truck. Dr. Richardson, I understand you're upset, but some of these demands are. I'm not finished, Amara said coldly. That's what you're going to do publicly. Here's what you're going to do privately. You're going to settle with my daughter for an amount my lawyer and I determine is appropriate compensation for the trauma you caused her. And you're going to personally apologize to Sophie in writing, explaining what happened and why it was wrong. Not your PR team. Personally. And if we agree to all of this? Patricia Morrison asked quietly. Then we negotiate a settlement quietly, and I don't spend the next 5 years of my life making it my personal mission to destroy your company. I don't go on every news show that will have me. I don't use my considerable platform to tell the world exactly what kind of airline you're running. I don't organize boycotts or encourage every tech company I know to drop your business accounts. And I don't file a lawsuit so comprehensive and damning that your stock never recovers. Thomas laid a folder on the table between them. We've already drafted the lawsuit. It's ready to file. We're prepared to go to trial and we're prepared to win. But Dr. Richardson is offering you a chance to do the right thing before it gets to that point. Hastings picked up the folder, flipping through pages of legal arguments, documented evidence, witness statements. His face grew paler with each page. This is extensive. We've been thorough, Thomas said. We have fingerprint evidence proving the cigarettes were planted. We have a recanting witness on the bracelet. We have documentation of previous complaints against Clarke. We have her social media posts showing racial bias. We have video footage of the entire incident. And we have a very sympathetic 9-year-old plaintiff who will look very good in front of a jury. How do you think you fare in this scenario, Mr. Hastings? Hastings set down the folder. He looked at Patricia Morrison, who gave a subtle nod. They both knew they were beaten. What kind of settlement are we talking about? Hastings asked. For Sophie's pain and suffering, emotional distress, and future therapy needs, we're looking at $25 million, Thomas said calmly. Non-negotiable. And before you balk, remember that a jury would probably give her more, and that doesn't include the punitive damages they'd add on for your negligence. Hastings winced but nodded. And the other demands? All of them, Amara said. Every single one. This isn't a negotiation, Mr. Hastings. This is me telling you what's going to happen. The only question is whether it happens quietly with some dignity remaining for your company, or whether it happens in the full glare of media attention with your shareholders watching your stock plummet day after day. Patricia Morrison leaned forward. Dr. Richardson, speaking as a black woman and as a mother myself, I want you to know that what happened to Sophie is unconscionable. I've been advocating internally for stronger discrimination policies for years. I'm on your side. Amara studied her for a moment. Then prove it. Make sure every single one of these reforms actually happens. Make sure this isn't just performative. Make sure the next little black girl who flies your airline doesn't end up handcuffed in an airport. You have my word. I'll hold you to it. David Chin from HR spoke up hesitantly. The employees who ignored the complaints, who approved Clarke's promotions, there were several of them. Firing all of them would cause significant disruption. Good, Amara said flatly. Let it be disruptive. Let it send a message to every other employee that this kind of negligence has consequences. I don't care about your operational convenience. I care about justice. Hastings stood up, signaling to his team to do the same. We'll have our lawyers draw up the settlement agreements. And Dr. Richardson, for what it's worth, I am truly sorry for what happened to your daughter. This should never have occurred. You're right, Amara said, not standing, maintaining her position of power. It shouldn't have. But it did. So now you get to spend the rest of your tenure as CEO making sure it never happens again. Sarah will send you our attorney's contact information. We expect to have settlement documents within 72 hours. After they left, Amara sat back on the couch, suddenly exhausted. The adrenaline that had been keeping her going for the past 5 hours was finally fading, leaving behind bone-deep weariness. Thomas sat down beside her. You did good, Amara. Really good. It's not enough, she said quietly. Money and policy changes, that's not enough. Sophie is still traumatized. She still asked her grandmother if she's going to jail. She still has to live with the memory of being accused, being handcuffed, being humiliated. How do I fix that? You can't, Thomas said gently. Not completely. But you can show her that when injustice happens you fight back. You can show her that her mother has her back, always. And you can make sure the next child doesn't go through what she did. That's not nothing, Amara. Sarah brought over her laptop. You should see this. The video Marcus posted has 15 million views now. There are protests organizing outside TransContinental headquarters. 5 senators have issued statements calling for investigation into airline discrimination. The NAACP is demanding a meeting with the FAA. Amara, this is bigger than just Sophie now. This is a movement. Amara looked at the screen, at the hashtags, at the faces of people marching with signs that said justice for Sophie and protect black children and end racial profiling. She saw mothers holding their daughters, fathers carrying their sons, all of them standing up because of what happened to Sophie. I need to make a statement, Amara said suddenly. Not through lawyers or PR people. Me. Directly. Are you sure? Thomas asked. Anything you say publicly could be used. I don't care. People need to hear from me. They need to know Sophie is okay, and they need to know we're not going to stop fighting until real change happens. So at midnight, standing in front of the Ritz-Carlton with Sarah holding up a phone to record, Dr. Amara Richardson addressed the millions of people who'd been following Sophie's story. My name is Dr. Amara Richardson, and I'm Sophie's mother. Today, my 9-year-old daughter was racially profiled, falsely accused of crimes she didn't commit, and arrested while flying alone to visit her grandmother. She was terrified. She was humiliated. She was traumatized. And she is one of millions of black children who face discrimination every single day. Sophie loves science. She wants to be an astronaut. She reads books about Mars and stars and the infinite possibilities of space. She volunteers at animal shelters. She brings her teacher flowers. She is kind and smart and good. And today, none of that mattered to a flight attendant who looked at her and saw only the color of her skin. But here's what I want everyone to know. Sophie is okay. She's with me now, she's with her grandmother, she's safe and loved. And we are going to fight. Not just for Sophie but for every child who's ever been profiled, accused, or treated as guilty for simply existing while black. TransContinental Airways will answer for what happened today. The employees who ignored warning signs will face consequences. The systems that allowed this will be reformed. And if you're a parent watching this, if you're someone who's experienced this kind of injustice, I want you to know, you're not alone. Your story matters. Your child matters. And together we're going to demand better. Thank you to everyone who's spoken up for Sophie, who shared her story, who's demanded justice. Keep demanding it. Keep speaking up. Because that's how change happens. That's how we protect our children. Together. The video was posted simultaneously across every platform. Within minutes, it had been viewed by hundreds of thousands. Within an hour, millions. And the message was clear. Amara Richardson was not backing down, was not going away quietly, was not going to let the world forget what happened to her daughter. In the bedroom, Sophie was finally asleep, curled up next to grandmother Joyce, one hand still clutching Mr. Whiskers, the stuffed elephant she'd had since she was 3. She looked peaceful now, the tears finally dried, her breathing steady. But Joyce stayed awake, watching over her grandbaby, thinking about all the times she'd warned Amara that the world would be hard on Sophie, that money and success couldn't shield a black child from racism. Joyce had lived through Jim Crow, through segregation, through decades of fighting for basic dignity. She'd hoped things would be different for her granddaughter. Today proved they weren't different enough. But Joyce also knew that Amara wasn't her. Amara had resources Joyce never had, power Joyce never wielded. And maybe, just maybe, Amara could use that power to make real change. Maybe Sophie's trauma could become a catalyst for something bigger. It was a terrible way to learn that lesson, but Joyce had learned long ago that progress often came at a painful price. The next morning broke gray and cold over Atlanta. Sophie woke up disoriented, taking a moment to remember where she was, why her eyes felt swollen from crying, why her grandmother was sleeping beside her instead of her mother. Then it all came back, and with it, a wave of sadness so profound she almost started crying again. But then she smelled something wonderful. Sweet potatoes. Cinnamon. Nutmeg. What? Sophie got up carefully, not wanting to wake Grandmother Joyce, and padded into the kitchen area of the suite. Her mother stood at the counter, still in pajamas, her locks pulled back, mixing ingredients in a bowl. She looked up when Sophie entered and smiled, and it was the first real smile Sophie had seen from her since before the flight. "Good morning, baby girl," Amara said softly. "Grandma left me her pie recipe. Figured we could make it together." Sophie climbed onto a stool at the counter. "You said you had to work today." "I did. But I called and canceled everything. Because today you're more important. Today we make pie. And later, if you want, we can go to the Science Museum, or we can stay here and watch movies, or we can do absolutely nothing. Whatever you need." "What about the airline? What about that lady who said I did bad things?" Amara set down the mixing bowl and came around the counter, kneeling down so she was at Sophie's eye level. "That lady was wrong. And she's going to face consequences for what she did. The airline is going to make big changes. A lot of people are working to make sure this never happens to another child. But right now, right this minute, I'm not worried about them. I'm worried about you. How are you feeling, baby?" Sophie thought about it, really thought about it. "Sad. And scared. And kind of angry, but I don't know if I'm allowed to be angry." "You're absolutely allowed to be angry," Amara said firmly. "You should be angry. What happened to you was wrong, and anger is a completely appropriate response. You don't have to be polite about it. You don't have to pretend it didn't hurt you. You can be angry and sad and scared and any other feeling that comes up. They're all valid." "I don't want to go back on a plane," Sophie said quietly. "Ever." "Okay. Then we'll drive back to New York, or we'll take the train, or we'll do whatever makes you feel safe. You never have to fly commercial again if you don't want to. What if people at school saw the video? What if they think I'm bad now?" Amara took Sophie's face gently in her hands. "Anyone who knows you knows you're not bad. You're the best person I know. You're kind and brilliant and brave. And if anyone at school gives you trouble, you tell me immediately and I will handle it. But Sophie, I think what you're going to find is that people are on your side. They saw what happened. They know it was wrong. You might be surprised by how much support you have." Sophie nodded, wanting to believe it. "Can we make the pie now?" "Absolutely. Come on, I'll show you how Grandma taught me." They spent the next hour making sweet potato pie, Amara teaching Sophie the same way Joyce had taught her 30 years ago. Mix the sweet potatoes until they're completely smooth. Don't skimp on the butter. The secret ingredient is a tiny bit of orange zest. They worked together, Sophie gradually relaxing, almost forgetting for moments at a time what had happened yesterday. When Joyce finally woke up and came into the kitchen, she found her daughter and granddaughter covered in flour, laughing at something, two pies cooling on the counter. The sight made her heart swell. "Well, would you look at this?" Joyce said, smiling. "My two favorite people making my favorite pie." Sophie ran to hug her. "Grandma, we made two. One for today and one for tomorrow." "That's perfect, baby girl. Because we're going to need all the pie we can get. Today is officially Pie Day. No sad thoughts allowed. Just pie and family and love." They spent the day exactly as Joyce prescribed. They ate pie for breakfast, which felt deliciously rebellious. They watched Sophie's favorite movies. They told stories, Joyce sharing tales about Amara as a child, about the family history, about the strong women Sophie came from. They existed in a bubble, just the three of them healing together. But outside that bubble, the world was moving. By noon, Vanessa Clarke had been officially fired from TransContinental Airways, the announcement making national news. By 2 p.m., two executives who'd ignored previous complaints had been forced to resign. By 4 p.m., the airline had announced its new Discrimination Oversight Committee and its $10 million donation to civil rights organizations. And at 6 p.m., police arrested Vanessa Clarke at her home, charging her with evidence tampering, filing a false police report, and child endangerment. The perp walk of her being led away in handcuffs made the evening news, a reversal of the image of Sophie from the day before that felt like justice, even if no amount of justice could undo the trauma. Thomas called Amara to give her updates throughout the day, but she'd been clear. Unless the building is on fire, don't interrupt Pi Day. So he sent text messages instead, keeping her informed but respecting her need to focus on Sophie. That evening, after Sophie had finally fallen asleep again, this time in her mother's arms on the couch while a movie played, Amara carefully extracted herself and joined Joyce on the balcony. The Atlanta skyline stretched out before them, lights twinkling in the darkness. "She's resilient," Joyce said quietly. "She's going to be okay." "I know. But she shouldn't have to be resilient about this. She's 9. She should be worried about math tests and playground drama, not about whether police believe her." "You're right. She shouldn't. But neither should you have had to be resilient when you were growing up, and neither should I have had to be when I was young. This is the world we live in, baby girl. We don't choose the battles we face. We just choose how we face them. I want to burn down every system that allowed this to happen," Amara said, and Joyce could hear the exhaustion and fury mixing in her daughter's voice. "Then burn them down," Joyce said simply. "You've got the matches. You've got the power. Use it. Make something better rise from the ashes. But remember, systems aren't the only thing that matters. Sophie matters more than any system. Don't get so focused on the war that you forget about the soldier you're fighting for." Amara nodded, knowing her mother was right. "I'm going to start a foundation. Specifically for this. For kids who've been profiled, falsely accused, traumatized by a system that's supposed to protect them. Legal defense fund, therapy resources, advocacy, everything. I'm calling it Sophie's Stand. Because she stood up for herself. She told her truth even when no one believed her. And now we're going to stand up for kids like her." Joyce smiled. "That's good. That's real good. Your baby's pain is going to help heal other babies. That's powerful." "It shouldn't be necessary," Amara said bitterly. "No, it shouldn't. But it is. So we do what we can with what we have. Same as we always have." They stood together in comfortable silence, 3 generations of Richardson women under one roof, wounded but not broken, angry but not defeated, ready to fight for a better world. 3 days later, after Thanksgiving was over and the pies were gone, Amara, Sophie, and Joyce drove back to New York. Amara had offered to arrange a private plane, but Sophie had surprised her by asking to drive instead. "I want to see the country," she'd said. "I want to remember that the world is bigger than one mean lady on one plane." So they drove, taking their time, stopping at roadside attractions and diners, making the trip an adventure instead of an escape. By the time they reached New York, Sophie was smiling again, really smiling, telling Amara about the science fair project she wanted to start working on. When they pulled up to their brownstone in Brooklyn, there was a crowd waiting. Sophie's classmates, holding signs that said "We believe Sophie" and "Sophie is brave and welcome home." Her teacher, Ms. Rivera, was there with flowers. Neighbors who'd known Sophie since she was born. All of them showing up to show support, to show love, to show that community matters. Sophie looked at her mother, suddenly nervous. "Do I have to talk to them?" "Not if you don't want to. We can go in the back way. But baby, these people are here because they love you. They want you to know you're not alone. Maybe just wave? Let them see you're okay?" Sophie thought about it, then nodded. She got out of the car and the crowd erupted in cheers and applause. And Sophie, small and scared but trying to be brave, waved. And smiled. And felt, for the first time since the plane, like maybe things could be okay again. Ms. Rivera approached, kneeling down to Sophie's level. "Sophie, I just want you to know that every single kid in our class signed a card for you. They all wanted you to know they support you. You're their friend and friends stick together." Sophie took the giant card, covered in signatures and drawings and messages of support. "Thank you, Ms. Rivera. You're welcome, sweetheart. Take all the time you need. When you're ready to come back to school, we'll be ready for you. No pressure." Inside the house, finally alone, Sophie looked around at the familiar space. Her astronomy posters on the walls. Her books stacked on shelves. Her telescope by the window. Everything exactly as she'd left it, but somehow she felt different. Like she'd gone away as one person and come back as someone else. That night, tucked into her own bed, with her mother sitting beside her the way she used to when Sophie was little, Sophie asked the question that had been bothering her. "Mommy, why did that lady hate me? I didn't do anything to her." Amara had been dreading this question, knowing it would come eventually, knowing there was no good answer. "She didn't hate you specifically, baby. She didn't even know you. She hated the idea of you. She saw a little black girl who was smart and confident and loved, and something in her couldn't handle that. So she tried to tear you down." "But why?" Because some people have so much hate inside them, they look for anyone to aim it at. And in this country, in this world, black people have always been easy targets for that hate. It's not fair. It's not right. But it's real. And the only thing we can do is keep being ourselves, keep being excellent, and keep fighting back when people try to destroy us. I don't want to fight, Sophie said quietly. I just want to study space. I know, baby. And you will. You're going to study space and be an astronaut and change the world. But sometimes, fighting and living your life are the same thing. Just by being yourself, by being brilliant and black and unapologetic about it, you're fighting. You're proving wrong every single person who thinks black kids aren't as smart, or as valuable, or as worthy. You're the fight, Sophie. Just by existing. Sophie thought about this, her 9-year-old brain trying to process concepts that adults struggled with. That seems hard. It is hard. It's the hardest thing in the world. But you know what? You don't have to do it alone. You've got me. You've got Grandma. You've got your friends and your teacher and thousands of people who saw what happened and said, no more. We're all fighting with you. Mommy, what's going to happen to the lady? The one who lied about me? She's been arrested. She's going to face trial. She could go to prison for what she did. Good, Sophie said, and there was a hardness in her voice that broke Amara's heart a little, because 9-year-olds shouldn't have to be hard. I hope she does go to prison. I hope she knows what it feels like to be scared and have nobody believe you. Amara couldn't argue with that. Couldn't tell Sophie she shouldn't feel that way. Because Sophie had every right to want justice, to want consequences, to want the person who hurt her to feel even a fraction of what she'd felt. I love you, baby girl, Amara said instead. More than all the stars in all the galaxies. I love you too, Mommy. More than Mars and Jupiter combined. It became their thing after that. Measuring love in astronomical terms. A small joy salvaged from the trauma. 2 weeks later, Amara held a press conference announcing the launch of Sophie's Stand Foundation. $25 million of the settlement from TransContinental Airways went directly into the foundation's coffers. Amara matched it with $25 million of her own money. $50 million dedicated to fighting racial profiling, supporting falsely accused children, providing legal defense and therapy resources, and pushing for systemic change. Sophie stood beside her mother at the press conference, small but steady, reading a statement she'd written herself. My name is Sophie Richardson and I'm 9 years old. A few weeks ago, something bad happened to me on an airplane. A lady accused me of doing things I didn't do, and for a while I thought my life was over. But it wasn't. Because my mom fought for me and lots of other people fought for me too, and now I'm okay. But a lot of other kids go through bad things and they don't have what I have. They don't have a mom with money and power. They don't have lawyers and people to help them. So we're starting this foundation to help those kids. Because every kid deserves to be believed. Every kid deserves a chance to tell their truth. And every kid deserves to be safe. Thank you. The press conference was covered by every major news outlet. Sophie's Stand Foundation became real, concrete, a legacy born from trauma but dedicated to prevention. Within weeks, they'd helped 3 families dealing with false accusations, provided therapy for 12 children dealing with racial trauma, and started pushing for policy changes in how schools and law enforcement handle accusations against minors. Vanessa Clarke's trial came 4 months later. The prosecution had an overwhelming case, Sophie's testimony clear and consistent. The fingerprint evidence proving Clarke had planted the cigarettes. Mrs. Patterson's recanting of her initial statement about the bracelet. Multiple previous victims coming forward to testify about Clarke's pattern of behavior. Jamie, the younger flight attendant, testifying about what she'd witnessed and how she'd been punished for reporting concerns. And most damning of all, Clarke's own social media posts, showing a years-long pattern of racist rhetoric that the airline had somehow missed or ignored. Amara attended every day of the trial, Sophie beside her when school allowed, both of them wanting to see this through to the end. On the day of Sophie's testimony, the courtroom was packed. Sophie took the stand in a purple dress her grandmother had made, her hair in perfect puffs, her voice clear and strong as she told her truth one more time. The defense tried to shake her, tried to suggest she was lying, that she'd planted the cigarettes herself and didn't remember, that children her age couldn't be trusted. But Sophie held firm, answering every question with the same unwavering honesty she'd shown from the beginning. Did you smoke on that airplane? The defense attorney asked. No, sir. Did you steal that bracelet? No, sir. It was mine. It belonged to my grandma who died when I was little. Is it possible you're mistaken about what happened? No, sir. I remember everything. I remember being scared. I remember crying. I remember asking for my mom over and over and nobody listening. I remember all of it. When Sophie stepped down from the stand, Amara wrapped her arms around her daughter and whispered, "You were perfect. So brave. So strong. I'm so proud of you." The jury deliberated for 3 hours. When they returned, the verdict was unanimous. Guilty on all counts. Evidence tampering. Filing a false police report. Child endangerment. Vanessa Clarke showed no emotion as the verdict was read, but in the gallery, Sophie felt something in her chest unclench, a weight she'd been carrying lifting just a little. At sentencing 2 weeks later, the judge addressed Clarke directly. "What you did to this child was unconscionable. You abused your authority. You targeted her because of her race. You traumatized her in ways that will likely affect her for years. And based on the evidence presented, this was not an isolated incident but part of a pattern of discriminatory behavior. I'm sentencing you to 4 years in federal prison, to be followed by 3 years of supervised release. And I hope during that time, you reflect on the harm you've caused." 4 years. It seemed both too much and not enough. No amount of time in prison could undo what had been done to Sophie. But it was accountability. It was consequences. It was justice, imperfect but real. Outside the courthouse, Amara gave one final statement to the assembled press. Today justice was served. But justice for one child isn't enough. The system that allowed Vanessa Clarke to target multiple passengers, that ignored complaints, that promoted her despite warning signs, that system is still broken. TransContinental Airways has made some changes, but other airlines haven't. Other institutions haven't. So our work continues. Sophie Stan Foundation will keep fighting until every child, regardless of their race, can travel safely, can exist in public spaces without fear, can be presumed innocent until actual evidence proves otherwise. Today was a victory. But the war is far from over. That night, back home in Brooklyn, Sophie did her homework at the kitchen table while Amara made dinner. Normal life, or as normal as life could be after everything that had happened. The science fair was coming up, and Sophie had thrown herself into her project. A working model of a Mars rover that could collect samples. She was building it with the intensity of someone who needed to prove, to herself and the world, that she was more than what had happened to her. "Mommy," Sophie said, not looking up from her work, "do you think I'll ever stop being the girl from the plane?" Amara set down the spoon she'd been using to stir pasta sauce and came to sit beside her daughter. "Eventually, yes. Right now that's how people know you because it's recent. But as time passes you'll become known for other things. You'll be the girl who won the science fair. Or, the girl who started that foundation with her mom. Or eventually, the first black woman to walk on Mars. You get to decide who you become, baby. That woman tried to define you, tried to make you into something small and shameful. But she doesn't get to decide your story. You do." "I want to be a scientist," Sophie said firmly. "I want to discover new things. I want to be known for what I find, not for what happened to me. Then that's what you'll be. And I'll be right beside you, cheering you on every step of the way." Sophie went back to her Mars rover, and Amara went back to dinner, and life continued in the way life always does after trauma. Not the same as before, not unmarked by what happened, but continuing nonetheless. Moving forward because standing still wasn't an option. A year later, on the anniversary of the incident, Sophie Stan Foundation held its first annual gala. The event raised another $15 million for the cause. Sophie, now 10 and more confident but still carrying the weight of what she'd experienced, gave a speech that brought the crowd to tears. "When I was 9, something happened that changed my life. For a long time I was angry about that. I was sad. I was scared. But my mom taught me that we can't always control what happens to us. We can only control what we do next. So I decided that what happened to me wouldn't be the end of my story. It would be the beginning of something bigger. This foundation has helped over 200 kids this year. Kids who were accused of things they didn't do. Kids who were profiled. Kids who needed someone to believe them. And we're just getting started. Because every kid deserves to be safe. Every kid deserves justice. And every kid deserves to dream big dreams without fear. Thank you." The crowd stood and applauded. Amara, watching from the side of the stage, cried openly, not from sadness but from overwhelming pride. Her daughter, her brilliant, brave, beautiful daughter, had taken the worst experience of her young life and transformed it into purpose. That was resilience. That was strength. That was the Richardson legacy. In the crowd, Officer Rodriguez attended as a guest of the foundation. He'd become an advocate himself after Sophie's case, pushing for reforms in how airport security handled accusations against minors, speaking at conferences about implicit bias and the importance of thorough investigation before jumping to conclusions. He caught Amara's eye and nodded, a silent acknowledgement of the role he'd played, small but important, in believing Sophie when others hadn't. Also in attendance was Jamie, the flight attendant who'd tried to stand up for Sophie. She'd left TransContinental Airways shortly after the trial, unable to work for a company that had enabled so much harm. Now she worked for Sophie's Stand Foundation, using her experience to train other airline employees on how to recognize and challenge discriminatory behavior among their colleagues. She'd become one of the foundation's most effective advocates, speaking from the perspective of someone who'd seen the system from the inside and knew how badly it needed to change. And in a corner, trying to stay unnoticed, was Mrs. Patterson, the elderly woman whose uncertain statement had nearly condemned Sophie. She'd lived with that guilt every day since, had written letter after letter to Sophie and Amara apologizing, explaining that she'd been manipulated but knowing that wasn't an excuse. She donated to the foundation monthly, every penny she could spare from her fixed income, trying in some small way to make amends. When Amara spotted her, she approached and Mrs. Patterson braced for anger or dismissal. Instead, Amara hugged her. "Thank you for coming," Amara said quietly. "And thank you for telling the truth when it mattered." Mrs. Patterson wept. "I'm so sorry. I should have been sure before I said anything. I should have. You were put in an impossible situation by someone who knew how to manipulate people. You made a mistake but then you corrected it. You told the truth. That took courage. Not as much courage as Sophie showed. Is she okay?" Amara looked over at Sophie, surrounded by other children, laughing at something, looking happy. "She's getting there. Some days are harder than others. She still has nightmares sometimes. She still gets anxious in crowded places. But she's strong. She's resilient. She's going to be okay. I pray for her every night," Mrs. Patterson said. "I pray for all of you." "Thank you," Amara said and meant it, because forgiveness wasn't about forgetting or excusing. It was about releasing the hold that bitterness had on your heart. And Amara had learned that lesson from her daughter, who'd somehow found a way to not let hatred consume her, to remain open and hopeful despite everything. The gala continued late into the night, a celebration of progress and hope and determination. And when it was over, when the guests had gone home and the ballroom was empty, Amara and Sophie stood together looking out at the city lights. "We did good, didn't we, Mommy?" Sophie asked. "We did great, baby girl. We turned something terrible into something powerful. We helped people. We made change. We did exactly what we were supposed to do. Do you think that lady, Miss Clarke, do you think she ever thinks about what she did to me? I don't know, baby. I hope so. I hope she has to think about it every single day." "I think about it every day," Sophie said quietly. "But not in the bad way like I used to. Now when I think about it, I think about all the kids we're helping. I think about how many people stood up for me. I think about how you fought for me. And that makes the bad memory a little less bad." Amara pulled Sophie close, kissing the top of her head. "You amaze me. You know that? You're 10 years old and you're wiser than most adults I know." "I learned from the best," Sophie said, leaning into her mother's embrace. They stood there for a long moment, mother and daughter, survivors and fighters, living proof that trauma doesn't have to define you, that justice is possible even when the system fails, that love and determination can create change even in the darkest circumstances. 2 more years passed. Sophie was 12 now, thriving in middle school, captain of her school's science team, still dreaming about Mars but also discovering a passion for advocacy and public speaking. She testified before Congress about discrimination in transportation. She'd been featured in Time magazine as one of the most influential teens in America. She'd become a voice for change, using her platform to push for reforms, to support other children who'd faced similar situations, to demand better from institutions that had failed so many. The foundation she'd inspired continued to grow. Sophie's Stand now operated in 15 states, had helped over 1,000 families, had successfully lobbied for policy changes in schools and law enforcement agencies, had become a force that couldn't be ignored. And at the helm, Amara Richardson used every ounce of her power and influence to make sure the foundation lived up to its mission. On Sophie's 12th birthday, Amara gave her a special gift, a letter from NASA. Not just any letter but an invitation to attend space camp, to meet real astronauts, to tour facilities, to learn from the best in the business. Sophie read the letter 3 times, tears streaming down her face, before she could even speak. "You're serious? This is real? Completely real. You've earned it, baby. Your grades, your science projects, your advocacy work, all of it. NASA wanted to meet the girl who's fighting for justice on Earth while dreaming about the stars. They said, and I quote, "Sophie Richardson represents the best of what humanity can be. We'd be honored to have her visit us." Sophie launched herself at her mother, hugging her with all the strength her 12-year-old body could muster. "Thank you, Mommy. Thank you, thank you, thank you. You don't have to thank me. This is all you, baby girl. You made this happen. You took something terrible and you transformed it. You're changing the world, Sophie. One day at a time, one fight at a time, one dream at a time." That summer, Sophie went to space camp. She met astronauts who'd walked in space, engineers who designed Mars rovers, scientists who were planning missions to Jupiter's moons. And every single one of them knew her story, knew what she'd survived, knew what she'd built from that survival. They treated her not as a victim or a symbol, but as a colleague, as a future astronaut, as someone who belonged among the stars. On the last day of camp, Commander Sarah Martinez, a veteran of 3 space missions, pulled Sophie aside. "I want you to know something," Martinez said. "What happened to you on that plane? That was the work of small people with small minds. But you, Sophie? You're meant for big things. Infinite things. The universe is waiting for people like you. People who fight for what's right even when it's hard. People who dream big despite everything trying to make them small. You keep dreaming, you hear me? Because one day you're going to be up there." She pointed to the sky. "And when you are, you'll look down at Earth and remember that you fought to make it better before you left it." That's powerful. That's what real heroes do. Sophie nodded, too overwhelmed to speak, and Martinez hugged her, and in that moment, Sophie felt something shift inside her. The girl who'd been handcuffed in an airport, who'd been called a criminal, who'd been traumatized and broken and scared, that girl was still there. But she wasn't the only girl anymore. There was also this girl, the one astronauts believed in, the one who'd started a foundation, the one who'd testified before Congress, the one who was going to touch the stars. Both girls were real. Both girls were her. And somehow that was okay. Years continued to pass. Sophie went to high school, graduated at the top of her class, got accepted to MIT on a full scholarship. At 18, she stood at the same institution her mother had attended, ready to study aerospace engineering, ready to make her dreams reality. And beside her, as always, was Amara, older now but no less fierce, no less protective, no less proud. "You made it, baby girl," Amara said as they stood on campus, looking up at the buildings where Sophie would spend the next 4 years. "We made it," Sophie corrected. "I couldn't have done any of this without you. Without Grandma. Without everyone who fought for me." "That's true," Amara agreed. "But you're the one who kept fighting. You're the one who turned pain into purpose. That was all you." Sophie thought back to that day on the plane, to being 9 years old and terrified, to thinking her life was over before it had really begun. If she could talk to that little girl now, what would she say? She'd say, "It gets better." She'd say, "You're stronger than you know." She'd say, "This moment doesn't define you unless you let it, and you won't let it." She'd say, "One day you'll stand on the campus of MIT ready to study the stars, and that flight attendant who tried to break you will be a footnote in your story, not the whole book." "I want to go back," Sophie said suddenly. Amara looked at her, confused. "Back where?" "To Atlanta. To that airport. I haven't been back since it happened. And I think I need to. I think I need to walk through that place without being afraid. I think I need to prove to myself that it doesn't own me anymore." Amara studied her daughter's face, seeing the determination there, understanding the need to face the place of her trauma. "Okay. We'll go together. Whenever you're ready." "Now," Sophie said. "Before I start school. I want to start this new chapter without that weight on me. Can we go next week?" So they went. Sophie, Amara, and grandmother Joyce, now in her 70s but still strong, still fierce, still the matriarch of their family. They flew to Atlanta on a private plane because Sophie still couldn't bring herself to fly commercial, and maybe she never would, and that was okay. Some scars don't heal completely, and accepting that was part of moving forward. At Hartsfield-Jackson Airport, they walked through the terminal together. Sophie's hands shook at first, her breathing quickening as memories flooded back. The aisle of the plane. The accusations. The handcuffs. The walk of shame through this very building. But Amara held one hand and Joyce held the other, and together they walked, and with each step Sophie felt a little stronger, a little more in control. They stopped at the spot where Sophie had been arrested, where those iconic photos had been taken. Sophie stood there for a long moment, remembering, processing, reclaiming. "I survived," she said quietly. "She tried to break me and I survived. I'm going to MIT. I'm going to be an astronaut. I'm helping other kids who go through what I went through. I survived and I won." You did more than survive, baby girl, Joyce said, her voice thick with emotion. You thrived. You took a moment meant to destroy you and you built a legacy from it. That's not just survival. That's victory. They spent an hour in the airport, walking through it like tourists, like regular people, reclaiming the space that had held so much pain. And when they left, Sophie felt lighter, like she'd put down a burden she'd been carrying for 9 years. On the drive back to the city, Sophie asked a question she'd been holding onto for a while. Mommy, do you think she thinks about me? Miss Clarke? She got out of prison last year. Do you think she thinks about what she did? Amara had wondered the same thing. Vanessa Clarke had served her time, been released on probation, and disappeared from public life. No interviews, no statements, no apologies beyond what her lawyer had read in court. I don't know, baby. Part of me hopes she does, hopes she's learned something. But honestly, I don't care what she thinks anymore. She doesn't matter to your story except as a catalyst. She pushed you and you pushed back and you won. What she thinks now is irrelevant. I don't hate her anymore, Sophie said, surprising herself with the realization. I did for a long time. But now, I just feel sorry for her. She had hate in her heart, and that hate destroyed her life. She lost her job, her reputation, her freedom. And all because she couldn't stand to see a black child being confident and happy. That's sad. That's really, really sad. Amara glanced at her daughter, amazed once again by her capacity for empathy and growth. When did you get so wise? I learned from my mom, Sophie said with a smile. And my grandma. And all the people who showed me that you can be strong without being hard, that you can demand justice without becoming bitter, that you can survive trauma without letting it poison who you are. They drove on, 3 generations of Richardson women, carrying the weight of history but also the hope of the future. Behind them, an airport that held painful memories. Ahead of them, MIT and space camp and advocacy work and all the possibility in the world. Years later, when Sophie Richardson became Dr. Sophie Richardson, when she graduated from MIT with a PhD in aerospace engineering, when she was accepted into NASA's astronaut training program, when she finally, after years of dreaming, went to space, she thought about that day on the plane. She thought about being 9 years old and terrified, about being accused and arrested, about thinking her life was over. And from the International Space Station, floating in zero gravity, looking down at Earth rotating slowly beneath her, Sophie Richardson thought about how wrong she'd been. Her life hadn't ended that day. It had begun. The real Sophie, the strong Sophie, the Sophie who wouldn't let anyone define her or limit her or break her spirit, that Sophie had been born in the moment she refused to let the lie become her truth. In interviews after her first space mission, Sophie was always asked about that day. And she always gave the same answer: what happened to me was terrible. I wouldn't wish it on anyone. But it taught me something important. Injustice exists, but so does justice. Cruelty exists, but so does kindness. Racism exists, but so does resistance. And every single one of us has a choice about which side we're on. I chose resistance. I chose justice. I chose to turn pain into purpose. And that choice changed my life. Back on Earth, Amara watched her daughter's interviews, her heart full of pride and grief and love. Pride in who Sophie had become. Grief for what she'd had to go through to get there. Love that transcended everything else, that had been the foundation of it all. And in a quiet moment, alone in her office, Amara thought about that phone call 9 years ago, the one that had started everything. Atlanta Airport security. There's been an incident. And she thought about how close she'd come to losing Sophie that day, not to death but to trauma, to a system that didn't value black children, to the kind of wound that never heals. But they'd fought back. They'd fought together. And they'd won. Not just for Sophie but for every child who came after, every family that Sophie Stan Foundation helped, every policy that changed, every person who saw what happened and decided to do better. That was the real victory. Not just surviving injustice but transforming it into something that prevented others from suffering the same fate. That was the Richardson legacy. That was what you did when the world tried to break you. You broke the system instead and you built something better in its place. Sophie Stan Foundation continued to grow and evolve over the following decades, expanding its reach beyond the United States to become an international organization. It partnered with civil rights groups around the world, provided resources in multiple languages, trained law enforcement agencies in implicit bias recognition, and created curricula for schools about discrimination and justice. The foundation became a model for how trauma survivors could create systemic change, how personal pain could fuel public progress. And through it all, at the heart of everything, was the story of a 9-year-old girl who'd been brave enough to tell her truth, and a mother who'd been fierce enough to make the world listen. Years turned into decades. Amara grew older, her locks going gray, her face showing the lines of a life well lived, a life spent fighting for justice. Joyce passed away peacefully at 92, surrounded by family, her legacy carried on in her daughter and granddaughter, in their strength and resilience and refusal to accept injustice. And Sophie, Dr. Sophie Richardson, astronaut and engineer and advocate, carried the torch forward, never forgetting where she came from, never taking for granted the privilege of her position, always using her platform to lift others up. On the 30th anniversary of the incident, Sophie returned to Atlanta one more time. She was 40 now, a veteran of multiple space missions, a professor at MIT, a mother herself to two beautiful children who would never know what it was like to be afraid of flying, who would grow up knowing their mother was a hero, who would inherit a world slightly better than the one their mother had been born into. Sophie stood in that airport, in that spot where she'd been arrested 3 decades earlier, and she gave a speech that was broadcast around the world. 30 years ago, I stood in this spot as a 9-year-old child, handcuffed, accused of crimes I didn't commit, terrified and alone. Today I stand here as Dr. Sophie Richardson, astronaut, engineer, mother, and I want to talk about how we got from there to here. Justice isn't automatic. It's fought for. It's demanded. It's built through the collective action of people who refuse to accept that this is as good as it gets. My mother fought for me when I couldn't fight for myself. And then as I grew older, I learned to fight alongside her. And together we fought not just for me, but for every child who needed someone in their corner. The system that failed me 30 years ago still fails children today. But it fails fewer children than it used to because of Sophie's Stand Foundation, because of changed policies, because of trained officers and educated teachers and reformed procedures. We've made progress. Real, measurable progress. But progress isn't the same as completion. There are still children being profiled. There are still false accusations. There is still racism, still bias, still injustice. So our work continues. The foundation continues. The fight continues. Because every child deserves what I eventually got. Justice. Belief. A chance to tell their truth and be heard. To every person watching this who has been falsely accused, who has been discriminated against, who has been told they don't matter. You matter. Your story matters. Your truth matters. Don't let anyone convince you otherwise. And know that there are people fighting for you, standing with you, refusing to give up until the world is just as it should be. And to the children watching this, dream big. Dream impossible dreams. Because I was a 9-year-old girl who wanted to go to space and people told me I was aiming too high. But I went anyway. I touched the stars. And you can too. Whatever your dream is, whatever your goal, don't let anyone make you smaller. Don't let anyone clip your wings. You fly. You soar. You reach for infinity. Thank you to everyone who stood with me 30 years ago. Thank you to my mother, who taught me that love is the fiercest force in the universe. Thank you to my grandmother, who showed me that resilience is our inheritance. Thank you to every person who demanded justice, who refused to look away, who made it impossible for the world to forget what happened here. This spot, where I experienced the worst moment of my childhood, has become a place of pilgrimage for our foundation, a reminder of why we fight, why we continue, why we never give up. From this spot, I went to the stars. From this spot, we built a movement. From this spot, we said, never again, and we meant it. The work continues. The fight continues. And as long as there are children who need defending, as long as there is injustice that needs correcting, Sophie Stand Foundation will be here. I will be here. We will be here. Together. The speech went viral just like that video 30 years earlier. But this time the image wasn't of a terrified child in handcuffs. It was of a powerful woman standing tall, speaking truth, inspiring millions. The full circle from victim to survivor to thriver to warrior. That night in her hotel room, Sophie video called her mother. Amara, now in her 70s but still sharp as ever, answered immediately. You were magnificent today, baby girl, Amara said, and Sophie could hear the tears in her voice. I learned from the best, mommy. Everything I am, everything I've accomplished, it's because you showed me how. You showed me that when the world tries to break you, you break the world instead. You remake it into something better. We remade it together, Amara corrected. This was always us, Sophie. From the moment that phone rang and told me you'd been arrested, through every fight, every victory, every setback, every triumph. This was always us. I know. And I hope I'm doing the same for my kids. Teaching them what you taught me. That they're valuable, that they're powerful, that they don't have to accept injustice, that they can fight back and win. You are, Amara assured her. You're an amazing mother. Just like you're an amazing daughter, an amazing astronaut, an amazing advocate. You're everything I hoped you'd be and more. Everything your grandmother hoped you'd be. You're our wildest dream come true. They talked for another hour, mother and daughter, discussing the Foundation's latest initiatives, Sophie's upcoming mission to the moon, the grandchildren and great-grandchildren who carried the Richardson legacy forward. And when they finally said goodbye, both women felt the weight and the lightness of their shared history, the pain and the triumph of their shared journey. Sophie closed her laptop and looked out the window at the Atlanta skyline. Somewhere in this city, in a modest apartment, Vanessa Clarke lived out her days in obscurity, her name synonymous with racism and injustice, her legacy one of shame. Sophie had long since stopped thinking about her with anger. Now there was only pity, a distant sadness for a woman who'd had so much hate in her heart that she'd destroyed her own life trying to destroy a child's. But Sophie hadn't been destroyed. She'd been forged, tested by fire and emerged as steel. And now, 3 decades later, she was using that strength to protect others, to shield children from the kind of trauma she'd experienced, to make sure that what happened to her became harder and harder for it to happen to anyone else. That was the point of surviving. Not just to live, but to live with purpose. Not just to heal, but to help others heal. Not just to overcome, but to ensure others didn't have to overcome the same obstacles. Sophie Richardson had gone from a terrified 9-year-old on a plane to a woman who'd touched the stars and changed the world. And the journey between those 2 moments, painful as it was, had been worth it. Because every child helped by Sophie's Stand Foundation, every policy changed, every officer trained, every life improved, all of it traced back to that terrible day when a little girl refused to let a lie become her truth. The legacy of that refusal would echo through generations. Sophie's children would tell the story to their children, who would tell it to theirs. The foundation would continue long after Sophie was gone, its mission carried forward by people who understood that justice is eternal work, that progress requires constant vigilance, that the fight never really ends but the fighters can be victorious in their time. And somewhere, in some future moment, another child would face injustice, and they would think of Sophie Richardson. They would remember that a 9-year-old stood up to racism and won. They would know that they could do the same. They would find strength in Sophie's story, courage in her example, hope in her triumph. That was the real victory. Not just surviving her own trauma, but lighting a path for others to survive theirs. Not just reaching the stars herself, but showing countless others that the stars were reachable. Not just refusing to let hatred break her, but breaking the systems that allowed hatred to thrive. Dr. Sophie Richardson, astronaut, engineer, advocate, mother, survivor, warrior. A girl who wanted to touch the stars and did, who wanted to change the world and did, who wanted to make sure no child ever felt as alone and terrified as she'd felt that day on Flight 447, and dedicated her life to making that true. If you could ask her, decades after it all, if it was worth it, if she'd choose the same path knowing what she'd have to endure, she'd say yes without hesitation. Because the path of pain led to purpose. The moment of breaking led to a lifetime of building. The day she was accused of being a criminal led to decades of advocating for the innocent. And in the end, that's what matters. Not what was done to you, but what you do with what was done to you. Not whether you fall, but whether you rise. Not whether you're broken, but whether you use the pieces to build something beautiful and strong and lasting. Sophie Richardson rose. She built. She soared. And she lit the way for millions to do the same. That is her legacy. That is her triumph. That is her truth. And from her truth, justice was born. From her pain, healing flowed for others. From her nightmare, countless children found hope. That's the power of one person refusing to be defined by the worst moment of their life. That's the power of a mother who loved fiercely enough to move mountains. That's the power of a community that stood up and said, "Not this child, not today, never again." If you found yourself moved by Sophie's story, if you see yourself or your children in her struggle, if you believe that one voice speaking truth can change the world, then speak your truth. Stand up. Fight back. Because Sophie Richardson proved that it's possible to turn trauma into transformation, pain into power, fear into fierce advocacy for justice. Subscribe to hear more stories like this. Stories of courage in the face of cruelty. Stories of justice emerging from injustice. Stories of Black excellence rising despite every attempt to diminish it. Stories that remind us that we are more than what people try to make us, that we are more than the worst moments of our lives, that we are always and forever enough. Because in the end, that's what Sophie learned and what she taught the world. You are enough. Your truth is enough. Your voice is enough. And when you refuse to be silenced, when you refuse to accept injustice, when you refuse to let hatred win, you become unstoppable. Fly high like Sophie did. Touch your stars whatever they may be. And know that somewhere, A 9-year-old girl who survived the unthinkable is cheering you on, believing in you, fighting for a world where your flight is never interrupted, your truth is never questioned, and your worth is never doubted. That's the legacy of Sophie's stand. That's the promise we make to every child. That's the future we're building, one fight at a time, one victory at a time, one voice at a time. Never stop rising. Never stop fighting. Never stop believing that justice, however delayed, is always worth pursuing. Because every Sophie Richardson who stands up makes it easier for the next person to stand. Every voice that refuses to be silenced makes it harder for the silence to persist. Every act of courage inspires 1,000 more. Stand up. Speak out. And know that you're not alone. Sophie Stand Foundation, the millions who supported her, the generations inspired by her story, we're all standing with you. Together we are stronger than any injustice. Together we are louder than any lie. Together we will build the world our children deserve. This is Sophie's story. This is our story. This is the story of how one child's nightmare became a catalyst for change, how one mother's love became an unstoppable force, how one community's outrage became a movement for justice. Remember Sophie Richardson. Remember that she was 9 years old and afraid, but she told her truth anyway. Remember that she was broken but she healed herself and helped others heal. Remember that she wanted to touch the stars and nothing, not racism, not false accusations, not trauma, not fear, could stop her from reaching them. That's the lesson. That's the legacy. That's the promise of what's possible when we refuse to give up, when we fight for what's right, when we turn our pain into purpose and our trauma into triumph. Go forth and do the same. Be the Sophie Richardson in your own story. Be the fierce advocate for justice. Be the voice that refuses to be silenced. Be the light in someone else's darkness. Because that's how we change the world. One story at a time. One truth at a time. One act of courage at a time. Thank you for witnessing Sophie's journey. Thank you for standing with her. And thank you for carrying her legacy forward, wherever your path may lead. Now go. Speak your truth. Fight your fight. Touch your stars. And never, ever let anyone make you small.